high school for a number of years, and I had this free period, and I would break one of the rules, you know, at least 3 times a week. I'd lock my door and fall asleep, you know, because I get up early anyway. I just get up super early. I like that. I like quiet time in the morning for a period of time. And I had this area. I would just crawl up on this shelf and books. And I would pull out a pillow and I'd put my legs up, and I would fall sound asleep for 10 minutes or maybe 15 minutes. Then I'd go and unlock my door so kids could come in and visit with me. And then I had this really demanding job as a program director for this addiction treatment center for kids that I did for a number of years as well. And I did the same thing. I would just tell the secretary, I'm going to my room, I don't want to be disturbed for about 5 minutes. And I'd lie down on the floor and fall sound asleep. And I'd get up, and I had another 3 or 4 hours of great productivity. So for me, naps really work.
But I think they have that in some businesses and places. They have these nap rooms. You go, you take a nap, you come out, and it's called a nap room, and you go there for 10 minutes.
It was big in corporate America for a while.
Oh,
there was about 10 years in the early 2000s where I kept coming across these articles about companies that were setting up nap rooms. Google was, I think, one of them when they first started out, because they knew the research. And when they tried it out, they said, oh yeah, our people are so much better, they're more productive, they're more creative, they're happier. I don't know if they've done away with all that. All right, we're going to talk about movement. So, I just want you to appreciate the large swath of brain geography that's taken up by movement centers and its proximity to the frontal lobes. It really helps organize large areas of the brain and is so important for kids. There are some really user-friendly books on this. My favorite is Smart Moves by Paula Hanford, who was a special education teacher at Hawaii, who then became a neuroscientist and wrote this book for parents and teachers. All these books I might mention along the way, they're in your bibliography. There's 4 sets of handouts, 4 bibliographies. You can find it there. Learning, thought, creativity, intelligence, and not processes the brain alone, but of the whole body. John Ratey's another hero of mine. Neurologists are finding evidence that the cerebellum, which coordinates physical movement, also coordinates the movement of thoughts. Now, cerebellum, which I'll show you in a moment, is a primitive part of the brain. Our higher brain functions have evolved from movement and still depend upon it. Now, this is the sensory motor area of the brain. This is the brain stem, sensory. This is the motor part of the brain. It's at the back bottom of the brain. And just as a point of illustration, what's known to be the case is that there are more neurons going up to the frontal lobes than there are from the frontal lobes down to the cerebellum, which says that the information flow from the bottom of the brain is really important for high brain functioning. So that has to do with the second general principle that I mentioned. The first principle of movement is it organizes the brain in children, organizes all areas of the brain. And the second principle is that movement alerts the frontal lobe, it awakens it, it energizes it for learning. So the more that we get children up out of their chairs, the more able they are to do the higher frequency brainwave activity that we're requiring of them, often before they're really ready for it. But a certain amount of it is fun, as long as they can get back to their default setting, which I'll cover along the way here. Now, anatomically speaking, in addition to the cerebellum, which has long been known for its role in coordination and balance and posture, we also have the semicircular canals, the ear, and in particular, this organ here, the semicircular canals, which are offset at 90-degree angles. There's 3 of them. And it's like a carpenter's level that has a bubble in it, right? And each one of these is very liquidy, and it gives us indications as to the position of body in space. Now that's a real problem as we get older, because the liquid component of that gets thicker. So there comes a time when if we try to do what we did as children, ride roller coaster rides and Ferris wheels and do cartwheels, we get sick because we experience vertigo, right? But in children, that sense of free movement, hanging upside down, cartwheels, all those crazy things that kids do after they master the basics of movement are all helping the brain to get organized. And so the more that we have the kind of equipment available to them to do all the things that children will naturally do, the more organized their brains become. They are self-driven to do those kinds of activities. And for a while, we went through a different kind of period of endarkenment in America, where we got rid of all the playground equipment. Everybody was afraid of lawsuits. And I visit these schools and go, my gosh, where's your equipment for the kids to do what they naturally do? It wasn't there. It's gradually coming back. A third thing to know in terms of appreciating the role of movement in organizing the brain is the gross anatomical organization of the brain along 3 planes. Now these are of course invisible lines, but they're used for the convenience of understanding the organization of the body, and in our case with respect to the brain, which I'll get to. So there are 3 major ways of anatomically dividing the body. So stand up and let's do them together. We'll get it in the body and then see here. All right, the first one divides the body from side to side, and it's called the sagittal plane. So just go like this to give you an idea of it, and say sagittal.
Sagittal.
Oh, good. The second one is the coronal plane. And the coronal plane, go like this, divides the body from front to back. Say coronal.
Coronal.
Right. And then the third one is the transverse or axial plane, which divides the body from top to bottom. Say axial.
Axial.
Good. What was this?
Sagittal.
Yes. What was this?
Coronal.
Yep. And
Axial.
all right. So those are the gross anatomical planes. Now, if you want to stay up, that's going to be fine, because we're going to do some movements here. Now, in between the semicircular canals, which actually mimic the organization of the brain, so we'll say there's a sort of a micro level of looking at it, the macro level of looking at it, and now in between, dependent on both, that is the gross movements of the body and the organization of the semicircular canals, which have to do with language processing, is the construction of the brain. From side to side, which is known, colloquially, perhaps, as the communication dimension. Because information that can cross the major commissure, which holds the 2 sides together, the more that happens, and it happens primarily through movement, the better the brain is at facilitating the flow of energy and information from side to side, which enhances the ability to communicate. Movement is the only thing that unites all brain levels and integrates the right and left hemispheres of young learners. The locomotion centers of the brain are paired facing one another along the top right and left hemispheres. And here they are. Those are the locomotion and pre-locomotion centers. And one of the great tasks of children is pre-planning their movements. I mean, they have to consciously, in some cases, think about the proper movements in the same way that children learning a musical instrument, or us as adults, we have to think consciously about the placement of our hands. A little bit more, and then we'll just do this movement. Movement ties in both hemispheres, allowing young children almost the only opportunity to apply both sides of the brain to an effort and attempt to pass information between the right and left hemispheres. Purposeful movement activities develop essential links between thinking, language, and movement. All right, so these sort of brain gym type movements where we cross the midline of the body, let's just do some. So again, it's that business of the left side of my brain is telling the right side what to do, the right is telling the left what to do. When the body does it, I form a feedback loop. It's going back to my brain, And my corpus callosum is loving it because all this information and energy transfer is creating more myelin. And myelin is the insulating material that makes energy and information transfer faster. Good. Now let's do the leg in the opposite direction. Good. Now what we're doing is we're really getting the cerebellum into the game. When the cerebellum, which controls balance and coordination, is involved in the game, more energy is going to the frontal lobes. Now let's move our head in the same direction that we're pointing at. And now, just for illustrative purposes, let's get the semicircular canals really involved in this and just stop right here. You can hold that balance, right? Now, one of the diagnostic tools that occupational therapists use with children is, can they do these sort of balance motions? And depending on their age, it can be a key to the child's learning disability. All right, now for the real test involving the semicircular canals. What we're going to do is we're going to go off slightly off balance, hopefully balanced a bit, and now close your eyes. Uh-oh. Do you immediately get a sense that your balance is off? Well, that's the semicircular canals in large part, because they need a horizon cue, right? And so our visual acuity, our ability to handle language is all tied into that complex of organs inside the ears, and that's the second most mature and developed organ system of the human body when we're born. Smell is first. Smell is the most mature and important organ that develops in infancy. And second is that are the inner ears. Now, as we get older, we have problems with balance, right? For lots of reasons. And it has to do with what happens in the brain when we get into pattern habits of movement which don't challenge new pathways to develop. Which is why when you travel in Asia and you go into the city parks in the morning and the evening, you see hundreds, if not thousands, of people doing Tai Chi and Qigong. So what I advocate is teaching children these movements like Qigong. And we're going to do some in just a little bit. Qigong is they're very, very simple, mindful-based movements that are done to enhance balance. All right? All right, so just a few more kind of fun cross crawls. I'm moving across the sagittal plane, right? And I'm doing that, I'm moving across the sagittal plane with two different planes of my body, the upper axial and the lower axial. So I'm getting all these great movements, and my brain is going, yay! And it's moving energy and information, right? And then you throw in something like Qigong, that are movements that we don't ordinarily do at all, let alone daily, and we really start to get some benefit, as you'll see. Okay, then you can do this kind of thing, right? Now, one of the things I learned from occupational therapists is this is one of the things that they do with children when they're going to work with them, is they have learning delays, right? They'll get kids and they'll have them stand on one leg. Can they do that, right? Well, if a kid is developmentally progressing as they should, and we don't see any real delays in their academics, kids at a certain age can balance themselves in certain ways. So an occupational therapist will say to a child who they're trying to do a diagnostic workup, will stand on one leg. And some children will do that, or they'll have them do this, and the occupational therapist will mirror it. And what they tell me is that in kids who have real attentional difficulties, they'll do this. They'll do it so fast that they couldn't possibly lose their balance. But then the therapist will say, no, just slow it down. Try it just like this. And the kids can't do it, right? So they go, okay. Then they'll give them a ball, or they'll model it, and they'll throw a ball from hand to hand. And the kids won't do it so well. So now they have diagnostic clue number 2. And number 3 is steady beat. So say to the child, please do what I do. All right, so that's steady beat. And children who cannot adequately model back or mirror back a steady beat, that's clue number 3. That the rhythm systems of the brain are off, the balance systems of the brain are off, and a lot of it has to do with possible gaps in the movement sequela since birth. And there's about a dozen of them. There's a dozen sort of sequential movements that children will do up to standing and walking, and sometimes those are missing. And so they'll have them go back and sort of do those things again. Now, you can also do this, you can also do these cross crawls with music, right? You can put on 1950s American rock and roll, and you can get the energy level up when it's low, like with high school kids in the morning, right? And with children in the afternoon when they're sort of running out of gas. Or you can go nice and slow, and you can put on some early Baroque music, which puts the brain into an alpha state, right? So you can do these things in a variety of ways with children, and it's just kind of fun. All right, let's go to the next one. The next one is the concentration dimension. It has to do with the brain's ability to move information successfully from back to front, front to back, because the frontal lobes are what control our ability to focus and attend, to concentrate. It's the third of the interlocking attentional systems that have to come online. They're sequential. There's the alerting system, which gets something that gets our attention. Certain areas of the brain come online, start to pay attention to what was alerting us, and then there's the orientation system, different areas of the brain, which help us to orient ourselves to what that information is that's coming in. Is this something I've never experienced before, or is it similar? And then finally the executive attentional system comes online, and that's the frontal lobes. And that begins to answer and respond to a whole series of other internal questions, like how is this being done, and can I use this information, and am I even remotely interested in this? When all three of those systems are engaged, then learning is starting to really happen. So this particular movement is designed to get the energy flowing, aroused enough in the frontal lobes of the brain that these other informational things can start to take place. So here we go. This is where something maybe like Qigong comes in. It has to do with movements to the coronal plane. It has to do with children at a certain age when they're doing skipping, when they're doing hopscotch, these movements back and forth. They're learning to somersault forward and somersault back, and they're learning to skate, and they're learning all these back and forth movements. In Qigong, they show up as movements that look like this. If you put one leg in front of the other, and they might look something like this. You'll see 100 people in a park doing this sort of stuff. Very slow. This one's called pushing the waves. All right? Now what I'm doing is I'm moving through my coronal plane. My brain is telling my body to do this. My body is saying mission accomplished to my brain, and the information is going in my brain like this. So this one has the benefit of increasing my ability for focus and concentration. We switch legs, do it on the other side. What's that?
I always thought this thing was loving. I'm just getting this a little bit as I do this like every hour.
You know, you can also do, now this also is very calming for children to do these things, and they will like doing them. I do a set called Incense Qigong, 17 different postures, one standing still, and then 16 of them that are moving. This is one of them. They don't take very long. They're easy to learn. If you go online and YouTube Qigong, spelled all kinds of ways, you can see all kinds of, there's hundreds of different movements. They use them in hospitals in China. Right after surgery, they'll have people lying in bed doing these movements. It's really cool. Right, now you can also do it in a real energized way, right? So if you've got a group of kids whose energy just, they don't have it, and you want to get the energy up a little bit, which I always end with a calm period, right? You want to get them energized, but then you want to have them sort of chill it back down because you want them to get some schoolwork done, right? So you could do something like this, you could just speed it up. So this one's a rapid fire Qigong, which sort of violates the principle of Qigong, which is slow. But it's fun to violate it once in a while. So now we're going to do rowing the boat across the ocean. So it would ordinarily look like this, right? Something like that. I love the names. Rowing the boat across the ocean. But now, if we're looking for something to energize ourselves, right, what we do is we're going to speed up and we're going to go something like this. Yay! So! Come on. Yay! So! Yay! So! Yay! So! Yay! So! Yay! So! Oh, too much. Too much. Okay, reach up. Reach up. I'm sorry. Reach up and bring your hands down like this. And then fold them right into your heart. And then just close your eyes. And feel all that energy you just generated settling in. It's a good chance to try to do the diaphragmatic breathing as well. Good. And that brings us to the third of the movements, which is the up and down, and that's the centering or calming dimension. So communication, concentration, centering or calming. This is particularly effective for balancing out the energies of the primitive emotional centers of the brain, the limbic system, the paleomammalian, ancient mammal brain system. Now, when we have too much energy going on in there, whether the emotion is negative, like anger, or fear, or anxiety, or positive, when children are overexcited, it's hard for them to settle their brains enough to learn, right? So a lot of the art of teaching is to modulate these mood centers, right? I mean, we want kids to be enthusiastically engaged enough to learn. And so a lot of what we do implicitly is sort of orchestrating the emotional centers of the brain when we're teaching. So the purpose of these movements is to create modulation in the emotions. All right, so this would be an example of it, right? Usually, the movements that associate with this are these up and down movements, right? So it might be something like just as simple as this up and down movement through the axial plane. And it's a good idea after any real energizing activity to have some sort of calming movements. Now, if you were in the room yesterday with kids, you saw me teaching them what's called smart brain yoga. If you weren't, well, here's how it goes. So you reach across and grab one earlobe, and there's acupuncture points here, which have to do with brain function. You grab the other one here. They've got some good imaging technologies at UCLA Medical School on the results of this. Now, that's the first thing. The second one is the breathing. Breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. And it's always a good idea, it's slightly advanced, which is to breathe in slightly less than we breathe out. And then the third component of it is up and down. Up and down. And the breathing in through the nose happens going down. So it just looks like this. And it's recommended to do this about 15 or 20 times. It just takes a few minutes. And to do it a few times during the day. It tunes up the brain in effect. They're actually using it after surgery with people undergoing some kind of brain surgery. That's how it was first applied. Good. Now that your brains are tuned up,
Brain yoga?
smart brain yoga. Yeah. Now that your brains are really tuned up, try this. Slap your knees once. Clap your hands. Grab your ear and your nose. Good. Slap. Clap. Slap. Clap. Slap. Clap. Switch. Slap. Clap. Switch. People grabbing their eyeballs, that's fine. Slap. Okay, we're done.
That was really fun. I was like, look at this thing.
All right. Different topic. Coronal biology. Coronal biology is one of the more recent science branches of biology. It's, well, it's actually not that old. It was actually formally adopted as a branch of biological science in the 1960s at Cold Harbor, Maryland, when a group of biologists came together and said, we need to recognize and begin to really study formally the science of rhythms in nature. And it was instigated by the desire to put people into space. And the concern was, what's going to happen to people's circadian rhythms when they spend time in space? Chronos was the Greek god of time? Or was that Roman? Greek, probably.
Did you watch the Greek wedding?
Yeah.
Everyone is from Greek.
Yeah. It's true.
That's true, it's all great. No, right.
It's funny because I thought some of these words had Roman origin. I wasn't careful enough.
You're not sure if I was Greek.
It's all Greek. I should know that. Well, what happened was, where was I? Oh, I was in Slovenia doing some work. And some people came over from Athens to be a part of that workshop. And the headmaster of the school came up to me afterwards and he said, this and this and this, they're all Greek, they're not Roman. This is the study of rhythms in nature, and there's many. They are like the interlocking magnetic fields of the heart and the earth and the sun and the galaxy and so forth. All these things interlock. There are many, many of them, but the ones that are of most interest to science are the infradian rhythms. Those are the larger rhythms, like seasonal and monthly rhythms that govern a lot of life. Then there are the circadian, the 24 to 25 hour rhythm that humans are on, the nocturnal diurnal sort of cycle. And the ones that are really interesting, I think, and have some real application in learning and education are the ultradian rhythms. Now, there's a lot of ways these are being studied. One is through these same sort of brain state that I introduced, at least the photos to you earlier. A lot of the science is being worked out, but in short, these ultradian rhythms follow the up and down cycles of the natural rhythms of alertness and consciousness and sleep. They're about 90 to 120 minutes. Somehow I think I left out the slide that shows all the different ultradian rhythms, but those would be in your handout. There's a lot of them, there's dozens of them. And these rhythms, beginning with sleep, vary in the frequency and amplitude of the wavelength. So just to get some sort of fundamental appreciation of frequency and amplitude, go like this. Right? So you're going to make a delta sine wave here. All right, so go like this, and you're making this big, strong wave. It's got a lot of amplitude, strength. But the frequency with which it goes in the brain is slow, right? So it has high amplitude, it has low frequency, right? And then just to add a little bit of the fun movement that goes with it, go like this. Delta. Okay, so delta is the rhythm of deep sleep. The unconscious mind is at work. Human growth hormone is secreted. Very, very important hormone. We don't need as much as adults, but we still need some of it for things like tissue repair. Babies need a lot of it, so they sleep a lot, right? Because their bodies and brains are growing so much. Well, around about the time that we come out of deep sleep, we go into a slightly higher rhythm, and that's the theta state that looks something like this. If delta looked like this, theta might look something like this. So do it with me, please. And say, theta. Because theta is a trance-like state, right? And in a long day like this for everybody, as I look around, there's at least a couple of you going. Yeah, am I going to wake you out of that? No. Because I know better. I know that that trance state is a really integral part of learning. And to deny you that is not a good thing. Now, if over half of you are in that state, well, I might do some kind of an intervention to bring your brainwaves back to speed, right? So I might have you go to your neighbor. I might have you get up and move, right? Yeah.
Just a quick question going back to delta.
Yes.
On the slide before, where you had the brainwaves, you had the
Yes.
REM, the rapid eye movement at the bottom of the slide. Go forward, right there.
Yeah.
Is that part of delta?
No.
Time? That's separate.
No, look at the amplitude and frequency. It actually mirrors the wide awake. Well, it actually comes closer to mirroring that one.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, what happens during REM sleep is we replay the events of the day, and the sine wave signature is very, very similar to what it would have been during the daytime. So we're reenacting a lot of those events, and all kinds of amazing things are happening during the dream cycle. Negative emotions are being decoupled, right? Negative experiences, events, and emotions are being decoupled. Positive ones are being reinforced. Creative ideation is being reinforced. Problem solving of different kinds is happening during that. And who knows what else. Dreaming is real mysterious. It's lovely. It's such a mystery.
Thank you.
Sure.
Can I ask a question about things?
Yeah, of course.
Snoozing.
Snoozing.
I got into a big discussion with someone recently about the importance of the snooze button. Okay? 'Cause we were sharing a room with my girlfriend, and boy, is this a debate.
Oh.
Because I cannot operate my day without at least a 30-minute snooze cycle. I do not feel like and I'm in that state.
So,
and I know
this is so important.
I'm aware that I'm beginning to slightly problem solve.
Yeah.
In my mind, but I'm relaxed about it.
This is when you wake up in the morning?
Yes.
Yeah.
And my friend was like, no, that's going to bother me because I don't want the alarm to go off until I'm ready. And why do some people need snoozing? I can stay them and some don't.
Well, it's personal preference to a large extent. It's habit to a large extent. But we need to know this about it, that when you're waking up in the morning, you are in the theta state, and it's known officially as a hypnopompic state. Great word. Say it, please.
Hypnopompic.
When we're falling asleep and we go through the same cycle, it's called hypnagogic.
Hypnagogic.
I should love those words. Well, it's a hypnotic state, right? It's a trance state. My wife when I wake up in the morning, I like to just get up,
Yeah.
right? I like to get up. But then what I do is I get my coffee going, and I get my meditation pillow out. I wake my brain up a little bit with the caffeine, and then I meditate. I go back into a theta state, right? I mean, I've just been doing that for years and years and years, and I love doing it. My wife likes to stay in bed, right? And she wakes up after I do. She stays up later, and she gets up later. So I say that my wife's theta surfing. And she's in that state, and she'll be in that state for 30 to 40 to 45 minutes. And she'll just review her day and think about things. And it's really, really an important state because we have access to our subconscious mind. And that's the key. Now, what I tell the kids is often that instead of looking into these devices right up to the time you go to sleep, and then your sleep's going to be really crappy because these suppress melatonin, and you're not getting enough sleep anyway as a teenager, you've got to turn these off an hour before you go to bed. Now, when you're in bed and you're beginning to fall asleep and these images come up, that's really a prime time to program your own subconscious mind. It's prime time, which means that you ought to be, A, either reviewing the most important things you learned during the day and want to remember, or you need to be using your most desired goals in life and thinking about those and in effect daydreaming about those. Do it then. Because if you go to sleep right after you've had all this stimulation from these devices, your brain is going to spend all of the good productive time planting the seeds of your own dreams of what you want to be in life here. It's going to substitute that for trying to wade through all the crap that you've been putting inside your brain right up till the time you fall asleep. I don't know how many of you do anything with what I say, but there's a lot of science behind those things. Yeah.
Is the same true for when you wake up in the morning and
That's
have a nap?
no, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah,
Well,
either one.
Or and both.
Oh, either
Yeah.
one. Yeah, and both. Oh, yeah. I should have said that more explicitly. Yeah. No, it's really an important time, but also we go through this during the day. Now, what the studies show about that is that there's a period, like learning might look something like this, right? So we're focused and concentrated. We got a sufficient number of catecholamines in our brain right now because we've just gotten up, we've gotten refreshed. We've got dopamine, we've got epinephrine, we've got norepinephrine. Those turn the brain on, right? They get it ramped up. We've got sympathetic nervous system juice now. We can focus, we can concentrate. It's all the beautiful stuff for getting things done in life, right? And then we go into a downtime where those things get replenished, right? And we daydream, we fantasize. Well, what's happening at that point is we're taking this new information and we're integrating it into things we've already known, and we're making associations. And the more that we productively daydream, the better, because that's when we're coming up with innovative solutions and so forth. Then we go through another period, right? Another practice, repetition, and variation period. And then we go through another consolidation, association period. And then we go to sleep. And each stage of sleep consolidates a different kind of learning. One stage of sleep, stage 2, consolidates motor learning. So anything I did that involved my body and my movements gets consolidated during stage 2, where we spend 50% of our night. Stage 3 is implicit learning. Implicit learning is the stuff we learn without knowing we're learning it, right? Which is 98% of what we'll learn in a lifetime. Stage 4, what's being consolidated is explicit learning. Oh, I have them reversed. Explicit learning is stage 3. Implicit learning is stage 4. Explicit learning is the learning that we get, that kids are trying to master in school. It's the stuff we have to pay close attention to when we're trying to learn it. Vocabulary, math formulas, this, that, the other. People, places, facts, figures, and events. We have to pay attention to it to get it in, and we have to pay attention and pull it out, right? That's what we do 95% of the time in education. That's the stuff that we're doing. There's nothing wrong with it, but we have to pay attention to this other stuff too. But the point is, it gets consolidated during sleep. So when teenagers are missing 1.5 to 2.5 cycles per night, a lot of the learning is just leaking out, pell-mell, helter-skelter, during the night, because they're not getting the sleep they need. So, like the bumper sticker says, out of my mind, back in 5 years. It's important to trance out once in a while, right? People who consistently engage in more daydreaming score significantly higher on measures of creativity. Look at this. About 1/3 of our time is spent daydreaming. Whoa. Got to be some value in that.
That's wake up time, or?
This is awake time. Yeah, this is awake time.
When you're in theta state?
This would be theta.
Yeah. Okay.
Alpha theta. Alpha theta. Low alpha, high theta. The brain activates several areas associated with complex problem solving, and the brain is most actively engaged when daydreaming. Now, about 20 years ago, it was discovered that the brain actually makes its connections during that time. Those are the initial connection stage. What's interesting is now science is talking about the natural default stage of the brain. Turns out it's a daydreaming state, right? So do we really, really want to prevent daydreaming from happening? Well, no, we don't want to prevent it. Everything has to be sort of in balance. But to think that it has no value, ooh, that's not so good. Yeah. Did you ever hear?
So that's the phase where we don't really process any input from ourselves.
That's right.
It's whatever we got in.
That's right.
And we just process it.
That's right. So what the brain is doing is it's taking the sensory input from a certain cycle
From inside.
and we're going inside. And that's why we get that look. Right?
There you go.
You're sort of staring at me, but I know there's nobody home. You went somewhere else. And I'm going, yes! Enjoy it. Well, Well, no, it's true. It's true. And a lot of times when our days are so busy that we can't do it, when we finally get a break, we just zone out, right? And it can go on and on and on. But, if you think of what Einstein said, he said that most of his ideas came up during downtime, during his walks. Anytime downtime is combined with nature and rhythm, walking is rhythmic, right? It allows those things to begin to come up. He said he got all his ideas basically in that way. Yeah.
Charles Darwin had some green area and he had a path that went through the loop.
Ah.
And he would walk there, and every time he hit a bunch of stones in one of the places, and he would push one of the stones so he could kind of get himself back to reality, knowing how many times he had to make the loop. This is he did most of the same thing.
I didn't know that.
So that was a reality check for him.
Yeah, that amazing. Thomas Edison, credited with the most inventions of anybody in U.S. history until recently. There was a gentleman who broke his record for patents. I don't know how many this new guy had. I should go back and read that again. But Thomas Edison had, I think, 1,043 patents. And he famously would do this little exercise where he would go into his office, and he would do this at different times during the day, maybe every 90 minutes, who knows. And he would go in, and as he would go in, he'd reach over and he'd grab some coins, and he would sit down in his comfy chair and just kind of relax, and he'd just be sitting there, and he'd go into this state of reverie, right? And just about the time that he'd fall asleep, the coins would fall out and wake him up. He'd grab his notepad and he'd start writing down all these ideas. It was clear that most of his good ideas came after a period of deep relaxation.
But he didn't want to fall asleep.
No, he didn't want to fall asleep.
So that's why.
That's why he had the coins. Yeah, he was a cat napper, a famous cat napper. And he would work, he was a legendary worker. He'd be in his lab 16, 18 hours a day, but he'd take these cat naps. Maybe he fell asleep for some of the time. He would have benefited from it for sure. But he had a patented way of really generating creative ideas. So that's the other thing that happens during daydreaming is the brain begins to forge these new neural connections. So that's that thing of paying attention, and in the trance state, everything starts to come together. Einstein called that activity of the brain recombinant play. And this is the thing that teenagers really excel at. Because of the brain frequencies that start to arise during the teen years, which I'll get to. The brain frequencies that arise and predominate during the teen years give them the ability to hold several ideas, and the ideas can be very disparate. They don't have to make any logical sense, but they can hold these different ideas and they come together in what Einstein called recombinant play. It's recombining ideas and thoughts. And who knows where it goes? Many people find their life's work during their teen years. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, teenagers tinkering around with computers. And the more they tinkered, the more they realized, I can do this better. So they're combining ideas and away they go. So theta. Now, it's also important to realize that during theta, the catecholamines are being produced. And again, catecholamines, which are necessary for learning, include dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. Adrenaline, basically. And when adrenaline makes its way into the brain, it becomes noradrenaline. The preferred usage scientifically is the British term, epinephrine and norepinephrine. It happens in theta. That's why the downtime is so important. It prepares us for the next episode where we're going to use those chemicals up, right? Then alpha, right? So this was delta, this was theta, and now do alpha with me. Alpha is relaxed but alert. It's relaxed but alert. The ideal state for learning and in some ways performance. It was the Bulgarian scientist Lozana, with all his experiments on what became known in the West as superlearning, who demonstrated to the world that it was possible to speed up language acquisition by 2 to 15 times. And his secret, which he divulged to the West once he made his bold escape from across the Iron Curtain, was that he was using Baroque music to facilitate a brain shift in adults so that they could more easily learn. So when you listen to Baroque music, or better yet, even play it, and get this alpha going, it makes learning so much more easy because we're awake but we're very calm. So a high brain really wakes up, right? But the body and the autonomic nervous system are very relaxed, right? It's effortless learning. And that's the natural state of children of a certain age. Their default setting is alpha. So the more that we can invite and facilitate a movement into alpha for a while, the easier it's going to be for them to focus and pay attention on the more challenging things that we want them to learn or need them to learn, right? Now the amazing thing is you can get alpha up in a lot of ways. You can do it listening to music, you can do it with movement, you can do it with rhythm, you can do it just by closing your eyes. Go ahead, just close your eyes. When you close your eyes, alpha starts to generate immediately from various areas of the brain. And pretty soon you have a brain full of what's called synchronous alpha. And then when you combine that with some diaphragmatic breathing, blood's now flowing up to the frontal lobes. Autonomic nervous system is coming back into balance. It's good. So what's often required is a period of practice. And that's the big take-home message from mindfulness that all it's learning today with, is that when we take a period of practice with some sort of mindfulness discipline, right? So we want to learn how to meditate, let's say, which isn't the only way that this stuff can be accomplished. We need to set aside a period of about a month. That's usually the benchmark scientifically for showing pre-post changes in brain function, hormones, immunoglobulin A, whatever, about a month. And it also takes a month for new brain cells to wire in. That's the minimum. It takes a month. So we develop a habit over a month's time by doing certain activities. So if we decide we want to make meditation a part of our lives, we need to set aside 10 to 20 minutes a day of quiet time. It doesn't have to be sitting meditation. It could be walking meditation. It could be praying the rosary. It could be doing qigong. It doesn't matter, because the results that are showing up are about the same. But after a month, we've developed a neural habit. And then we can go into these states very easily, right? So we can close our eyes for 1 minute, diaphragmatic breathing, and we just reset things. Because we've got it in our nervous system. All right, now, this is one of the benefits of alpha. That's where serotonin gets produced. Wow. So, children have the natural ability to keep their serotonin levels high. That's the mood regulator, helps them with self-regulation. It regulates appetites. It regulates drive. All these things that we want children to learn how to self-regulate. Serotonin is a booster for all that. One of the hallmarks of people who become depressed is they have so much stress in their lives that they've lost the innate ability to generate alpha waves. They're always on fight or flight mode. They're always in high beta. They're stressed out. Fight and flight is not a good place to stay. And that's a very primitive low brain response to threats in the environment.
Can I ask, like,
Yeah, please.
Because maybe not everyone's aware of what state they're in.
Yeah.
Like, if you're in the beta state, does that mean like you're getting more tired? You're getting.
If you're in it too long, yeah. And in fact, as we get older, we start to experience chronic fatigue. Or what typically happens, well, let me just put that off for the moment. Let's look at low beta, right? Low beta. All right, so now go like this, right? So alpha was more like this. Beta's like this, right? And it might look something like this. Beta, beta, right? Alpha, beta. So beta has more energy, it's a higher frequency, and allows us to focus and pay attention. That's good, but not all day long. It really is using way too much sympathetic nervous system energy. We're going through our day and we're depleted. Now you can get away with that when you're young, but it starts to catch up in the 30s, right? And by the 40s, usually some genetic weakness in the system is starting to give way. And that's often ancestral, right? I'm Welsh-Irish. Got a lot of respiratory things in the Welsh-Irish. Cold, damp climate, right? In my family of origin, right? People got sick, it was always bronchial, right? I had a horrible, most stressed period of my life. I came down with pneumonia, right? That's the weak link in the chain. You know, for other people, it's other stuff. It's back stuff. It's headaches. It's TMJ. It's cancer, right? So this is high octane fuel. We absolutely need it. But if we're not careful, and if we've had the unfortunate experience of being in environments which we perceived as a threat, we can easily shift into an agitated state. And it sort of looks like, beta! You know, it's this wild and crazy state. It's fight or flight, right? And that's not a good thing. Sometimes it's necessary. We're driving our car and somebody pulls in front of us, we slam on the brakes, right? And the brain is going like that, the adrenaline's pumping like that. No, we just avoided an accident. Hallelujah. We've got that energy when we need it. But to try to do this all day long, pretty soon the body thinks it's in fight or flight mode the whole time. Pretty soon the body is acting like it's like life is an emergency, right? That everything's an emergency because we've conditioned the body to doing that. We're now in what's called an instead of a homeostatic state, we're in an allostatic state. We've changed the baseline of our function so that we're operating as if life is a threat to our survival. And that's not good. Now, to sort of round out this whole thing, it's important to come back to this. EEG activity in children reveals at every developmental stage the predominance of a specific brainwave. So, for children in the early stage of sensory motor, children sleep a lot and they need their sleep. The natural brainwave setting is delta. Now, sleep is shortening and being disrupted on every age level from birth up, which is not a good thing. And it's the pace of life that we're all trying to maintain. Between the ages of 2 and 7, what Piaget referred to as the pre-operational state, remember his descriptor was the dreaming child, right? The dreaming child's default state is theta. And what is it that facilitates theta in children? Daydreaming, fantasy, imagination, and play. And historically, evolutionarily, the mechanism for promoting that is storytelling. When children are told stories, it activates their imagination because they create the images. And then play is the output. So the input is story, the process is imagination and fantasy, the output is play. But that's all been substituted with screen technologies, right? This is the storytelling. And then sometimes we wonder why children's behavior is so alarmingly off, right? Well, they're just playing out the input side of things. So we have to be very cautious about this. And we're, collectively, socially, we're not even paying attention to these things. Yeah?
Does any of it have to do with the actual light that you get from the screen?
It does. It has a lot to do with it.
Because sometimes I read stories to the kids, but when I have a big group, I put it on a big screen,
Yeah.
you know, with an online book.
Yeah.
I still read it, but is it the light that has
Well,
to do with it?
yeah, the light does, because we have evolved to get information, visual information, from reflected light. This is reflected light. That's reflected light coming into the room. This is radiant light. This is radiant light. It would be better to have this projected onto a wall, because that's reflected light. What the studies show is that because as an organism, our brain has not evolved to extract information from a radiant field. It's almost like looking into a campfire, right? When we look into a campfire, we go into a trance. And when we go into a trance, that's a great thing. But when we're trying to get information out of a radiant field, the brain has to really work. I mean, oh man, I just want to go into a trance here, you know, because I'm looking into a radiant field, and now I got to keep my brain awake, right? And we have to reread the passage and reread the passage, and pretty soon we just go, oh, the hell with it, I'm going to print it off. because the studies have shown that we comprehend and understand so much better from print than we do from radiant fields. So we're trying to make our brain adapt to something which is very foreign. Moreover, the more time we spend on this, the more it suppresses melatonin. And then we have a hard time sleeping. Because this is the blue, this is the end of the color spectrum, the electromagnetic field of blue light. And blue light has been shown in a number of studies. First one I came across was in France, that will suppress melatonin as much as 22%. Yeah, so it does make a difference.
That seems contradictory to me.
Yeah, how so?
Because first you're saying, or secondly, you said that the blue light interferes with sleep,
Yeah.
but then you're saying the radiant light, this from the same source, is putting us into a trance-like state.
Yeah,
So, which
it's both.
sort of heads you towards the sleep, no?
Well, not necessarily at all, because
Okay.
in order to maintain my ability to engage in this, I have to exert a sufficient amount of beta to pay attention, but my natural inclination is to go into a trance. So my brain's in conflict with itself, and it's exhausting.
So
Well,
you're
and the sleep thing is an artifact of the blue light suppressing melatonin, so it's a slightly separate issue.
that's different.
Yeah, slightly different.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you might feel exhausted by this, but not naturally then able to fall
Yeah, that's
asleep
another way of
as
putting
easily.
it. Yeah. I mean, I know when I'm on these things for a while, I just want to point a gun to my head. I feel so agitated, you know, and like, oh man. And you know, I'm an adult. I've got an adult brain. I'm not a little child who's doing this for hours and hours a day. And you know, my poor little brain is doing its best to try to adapt to this strange medium, actually. Well, it's one of the reasons why the initial readers switched from radiant to reflected light. Are you aware of that?
Like the Kindles.
Yeah, the Kindle
Like,
now
this is just
uses
like
reflected
reading a
light.
book. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
okay to read before bed if it's a Kindle or whatever.
It's reflected light. Yeah, and it's a marvelous advance because, as any of us will attest, if you're reading a lot of information from a radiant field, the comprehension, what did I just read? You know, but now they've changed the technology. Yeah.
And also my son told me he changes the light on his computer, that when it gets dark, the light becomes kind of like yellow, kind of like sunset-y. So I don't know if that's helpful. You know?
Well, I think what's going to happen is the light from these is going to eventually change because the information is known. It's going to be less blue
Yeah.
and it's going to be more natural. And I've heard they're actually doing it so that it will change as the day goes on.
Well, that's what he is doing.
Oh, that's what he's saying.
That he's basically
No,
found a way, he
that would help.
researched, and his basically light changes
Yeah.
on his computer.
Yeah, I did read about that as well, now that you mentioned it. Yeah, and I think that will help. I look forward to it. Yeah.
I totally understand what you're talking about these like dual processes happening when you come to this mental fatigue or exhaustion level. So why is it also then that it's so highly addictive? Like if the brain doesn't want to, like
Yeah.
if the brain is
Good point.
conflicted, and then we're saying kids are addicted to screen time.
Yeah, good
Why?
point.
What is it feeding that you want to keep going back to that? What's
Dopamine.
Okay.
So we have to remember that dopamine is an integral part of the excitatory transmitter mix that keeps the brain in an alert state. But dopamine is one of the most complicated multi-purpose chemicals in the body, has to do with all kinds of functions, is also primarily the chemical that's involved in the primary pleasure reward circuit of the brain, right? So when sufficient dopamine is in the pleasure reward circuit, we are motivated to seek pleasure. It's a motivational chemical. And it's also released when we experience the achievement of a reward. We get more dopamine. That's what's released in the brain with a lot of drugs, is dopamine. Well, in order to pay attention here, I have to keep generating dopamine. in my brain. And a lot of these technologies are designed to reward the brain. And so that's using up dopamine as well. And so there are certain games you can play that become even more addictive because of the dopamine that's being released from the brain. So you can actually set up an addictive cycle,
Yeah.
like you can in other ways. So, all right, so theta brainwave, enhanced catecholamine. Then comes concrete operations, which is alpha brainwave, which is already described. This is where serotonin gets produced. And this is the upper elementary student up to about, roughly about puberty. And then at puberty, all these changes take place. The teen brain goes through a metamorphosis and nothing short of that. And we get the enhancement of a refined brainwave, which is beta. And when beta is going, it allows teenagers who now have all kinds of new capabilities emerging to really maximize the functioning of the brain. But this in itself can be a very addictive state because it requires dopamine. Dopamine is what's running this high octane. And we can actually get addicted to these beta brainwave states, and we get so enamored of it because we can mentally or physically check off all the things we got to do. We go, well, if I can do one, then two's better. I'll do two at once, right? Oh, maybe I'll do three things at once. And they've done these studies of college students. They did one at MIT, and they interviewed these students who thought they were really brilliant multitaskers. And they actually gave them, they put them in a lab, and they actually were able to demonstrate to the students that their ability to do anything well when they're multitasking goes down, and the kids wouldn't believe them. They just refused to believe it because they'd already programmed themselves to believe that they were much more efficient when they're actually multitasking. So it's really that addictive cycle, right? Kids were in denial about the fact that they weren't really doing these tasks all that well because they were constantly having to divide their attention, stop, shift, refocus, boom. They weren't actually multitasking, they were serially tasking very rapidly, and they weren't doing any of the tasks particularly well. Yeah?
Can I ask a question about multitasking from something long ago that seems like I've heard on the male and female brains? There, something about more crossover with female brains or something, multitasking abilities going back, evolutionary, women with babies and picking berries and all that. Whereas men, less crossover, it seemed like it's we're able to stay focused, must go hunt, must do this. So where did I get that from?
Well, it's been flying around for a long time. There's a lot of controversy on every single one of these
Is that from
issues.
Venus, men are from Venus?
Yeah, that's where it all began. It's fun stuff. It's very entertaining.
Was there any scientific evidence ever to that?
Well, there is, but you'll get 3 studies that'll say it's so, and you'll get 3 that say it's not so.
Okay.
So a lot of people focus on the outliers, but when you actually look to the middle of what the aggregate is saying, there's only a couple of things that are for sure different in male and female brains. One is that the timing of what comes online is slightly different between males and females. So it's possible that females are able to learn language a little bit better and a little bit sooner than males. And that seems to be the case. And some areas are a little bit larger than others, and those are the only 2 things, but nobody knows what that means really. You can say it means this and you can say it means that, but as soon as you say that because you read something here, you can turn around and read the opposite over here.
There's conflicting research on that.
Oh, a lot of conflicting
That is
research.
like the mom holding the baby, stirring the pot, and, you know. And
Maybe
doing all
that's
these
true.
things. And I'm just, is there anything? Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe it's true. You know, a lot of times the anecdotal research proves to be absolutely true. But when you sort of look at the whole bell curve of the research on male-female brains, it only converges convincingly on 2 points. Yeah. So the rest of it, we'll have to wait and see. And then you have a difficult time sorting out the cultural artifact, and that's really hard. Like how much of it's culture that's bringing about these changes. So I love it. I read all that stuff. No, I think it's important and it's somewhat entertaining as well. Well, we need to move. Boy, do we need to move. Stand up, please. Whoa.